I've done my share of teaching on complicated and controversial topics down through the years. I've preached on Revelation, discussed misunderstandings about prophecies and speaking in tongues. I've not shied away from teaching about the nature of the Holy Spirit or angels or demons or even the confusion over the roles of men and women and a dozen other in-depth kind of studies. However, I think we always need to remind ourselves that such topics are not salvation issues. In fact, good people can use the same scriptures and sometimes see different things. The important thing is that we continue to love each other and look at each other as brothers and sisters in the Lord. On top of that, I want to say that we should never forget that there are more important topics that may not be as controversial, but instead basic. And many think basic really means boring. They even think that maybe everything has been said that can be said, so why say anything more? But this morning I want to remind you that there are some basic things that are important things, and they are deep things. I mentioned a moment ago that I want us to reconsider what it means to follow Jesus. And if I could just get a show of hands, how many of you here think following Jesus is important? See, it's not real controversial, is it? And I can already see by a couple of facial expressions, you're already becoming bored. Hang in there with me. We're going to try to learn something new about a very basic kind of thing. And so, Mark chapter 1, beginning in verse 16. As Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." And at once they left their nets and followed him. Mark chapter 2, beginning in verse 13. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him. And Levi got up and followed him. Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse 34. And then he called the crowd along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." Mark chapter 10, this time beginning in verse 21. Jesus looked at him and loved him. "One thing you lack," he said. "Go sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." I don't know of a single place in the New Testament when anyone is ever asked to accept Jesus. You will not find a single scripture in the Bible that ever suggests that all one needs to do is to invite Jesus into their heart. And yet over and over and over again, Jesus asks people to follow him. And following him is very different than just accepting him. The mission of Christ involves sending us out into the world, not to get people just to say, okay, I believe this and that. The mission of Jesus is that he sent us out to make disciples. And that's more than just accepting a couple of ideas. That's more than just saying, okay, I believe in Jesus. It is a radical kind of change that Jesus is calling for us to live. And I want you to know this morning that our goal here is not to make people who like Jesus, but actually we intend to make people who are like Jesus. And those two things are not the same. In America today, you can be a Christian. Now hear this. You can be a Christian in America today and not follow Jesus. Do you understand that? People can say, I believe in Jesus, and then they can go on and live just however they want. It's an idea that our country has firmly grabbed onto. And yet it is so different than what Jesus intended. I believe that the church across America has a formation problem, or more precisely, a transformational problem. At this place, duplication must be our destination. And so, the reason that that is so important is because there's often a gap between what we say we believe and how we live. And God never intended that gap to exist, I believe. Now, I'm going to put my sociologist hat on for just a little bit. You may not know this, but there's all kinds of research to say how people come to select a church. All kinds of research that talks about what goes into a person's decision to make a particular congregation their own. And this is summarized in a little book called Future Church. I think Will Mancini et al., some other people. And it's kind of a summary of some of that research in an easy to understand format. And they came up with these P's. Key ingredients that go into a person deciding what their home congregation will be. Place. Next, personalities. Next, programs. Next, people. Oh, by the way, you'll notice doctrine's not in the top 4. I wonder why. Place. You realize that some people pick out a church because it's close to where they live. That's the best thing that church has going for it. It's not too far from them. And then there are personalities. They like the pastors, they like the ministers, they like the leadership team, and so on. Then there are programs. It has to do with a congregation that offers things that I like. Maybe things that I like for my children. Maybe there's a support group that is particularly meaningful to me. And then there's people. The idea that there are certain groups where I feel like I can make good friends. And they become important to my life. They're warm and accepting, and I enjoy being around them. Here's the problem with all 4 of those. They are transitory. What happens if you have to move 15 miles away from the church building? Maybe you decide to build a house or do something. All of a sudden, at least by Idaho standards, that church is no longer close to you. What about personalities? Ministers leave. They come, they go. The makeup can change from time to time. What's that going to do to your selection? Programs. New programs come. Old programs are discontinued. Now where are you? People. Perhaps you have some of your friends that move away. Or perhaps they start attending at a different place. Now where are you? And that is one of the challenges that comes when most people are trying to pick out a congregation where they wish to belong. Now, isn't it more important to find a group of people who are committed to being more like Jesus? Isn't it more important to find a place where you are challenged, even held accountable for how deeply you can follow Jesus? And the reason for that is because those are transformational. They transcend location. They transcend personalities. They transcend programs and people. All that other stuff will come and go and change, but Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And in fact, belonging to Him, deeply following Him, helps us to negotiate all those other changes in life. He's the anchor for how we live, not transitory. Our culture has trained us to be consumers of Christianity. And I'm not telling you this is an evil sort of thing. I mean, this is our world. We live in a marketing world. We live in a world where people are always being persuaded by advertising and other sorts of things, convinced that they need such and such. And by the way, we have just a product that will meet that need of yours. And it's understandable that churches that want to grow have picked up on this idea and a lot of times promote themselves by what they offer others and how they can scratch the itch that you have in your life. But at the same time, is that really where Jesus wants us to be? Are we supposed to find a congregation that provides services that we like? And when those services are no longer available, we'll go and find another church that we like, that offers what we want. We have a number of guests with us today. We have a number of guests with us on almost every Sunday. Now, what I'm about to say doesn't apply to any of them. But it wasn't too long ago, actually about a year or so, when someone who'd been here for a while, and I asked them if they had any questions, and I asked them if they've ever thought about becoming a part of this church family. And they said, okay, put it in a nutshell, what do you offer us? Now, I didn't tell them, don't let the door hit you on the way out. That's not very nice. But it's just another symptom about the world that we live in. We have a tendency to size up the value of a congregation by how they provide what we need. How different it is to look at a place and ask yourself, what can I give? Instead of what I can receive, what can I give? How can I serve? How can I help myself and others grow to be more like Jesus? That is a whole different kind of perspective. You see, we can be part of a place that is part of the answer to Paul's prayer about the churches of Galatia. Until Christ is formed in you, fully formed, he says. Now, I'm going to nerd out just a little bit more, taking off my sociologist hat, putting on my Bible professor hat. had. I want you to know this morning that Jesus did not invent discipleship. A Jewish boy and a Jewish girl, when they were young, if their parents allowed, they would send them off to school at the local synagogue. And there they would be taught, ages 5 through 12, kind of their own version of elementary school. It was called Beth Zephyr. It meant place of the book. Place of the book. And at Beth Zephyr, they would learn the law. And by the way, just a little Hebrew hint. Anytime you see the word Beth, it means place. Bethsaida means the house, the place of fishing. It's along the lake there. And so here you have Beth Zephyr, house of the book. They would study the Torah. That's what we know as the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch. They might learn to read a little. They might learn to write a little. But most of all, the rabbi, or more likely one of the rabbi's apprentices, would teach them about the law of Moses. At age 12, the girls, all of them, would be sent home. It was time for them to start depending on their parents, to arrange marriages and to think about getting married and having babies. That was that culture. Most of the boys would be sent home at age 12. It was time for them to learn the trade of their fathers. And so they would learn how to be a fisherman. They would learn how to be a farmer. They would learn how to be a shepherd, or whatever it is that their dad did to make a living. But a few boys would get to stay for middle school. It was called Beth Midrash. And Beth Midrash is the house of study, the place of study. And what they would do is they would study the prophets. And so at first it was the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Torah, and then the prophets and the wisdom literature. They would study that between the ages of 13 and 17. And then it would be time for them to return to home. Hopefully they would be people who would help out at the local synagogue. Perhaps at least they would be spiritual leaders in their community. But then there was just a select few, a small group that would be invited to become Beth Rabbah. And that meant house of the teacher. They would become disciples of the rabbi. And it was a life that was devoted to learning everything that rabbi could teach, 18 and up. They would live with that rabbi 24/7. They would be under his teaching. They would learn to see the world as their rabbi saw it. Teaching in that culture, it was what would later become known as a Socratic method, but it was a question, answer, debate, and that's basically how rabbis tended to teach. And after a certain amount of time, they would then be expected to become rabbis in waiting, perhaps becoming rabbis themselves, teachers themselves. It would be considered a high honor to be such a person. And so when this popular young rabbi came along that people had been talking about, and he invited people to come follow him. And the people he invited, they were already rejected when they were younger. They had been sized up and considered not to be bright enough, not to have the right aptitude, not to be ready to move on to the higher levels of education. But here's this young rabbi who invited people who didn't make the cut earlier, people who were working menial jobs, fishing and tax collecting, or causing trouble as a zealot, or perhaps simply thinking that all they have to do in life are the duties of the home. When he said, "Come follow me," that was amazing. And many of them dropped what they were doing and immediately began to go follow him. There's another thing about Beth Rabban. It's also known as under the yoke. Under the yoke of that rabbi. And doesn't that help the words that Jesus said in Matthew 11 mean even more? Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, or from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. It's not a hassle to follow Jesus. It is a high honor. And so a mom's looking out the window as she's going about doing what she wants to do inside the house. And there is a little 7-year-old Johnny, and he has his children's Bible open, and he's reading to the cat. And she thinks, "Oh, that's so cute." And she goes back to doing what she was doing, and then all of a sudden she hears this ruckus, these screams. The cat is screaming bloody murder, and she goes running out the back door, and here's little Johnny taking the cat, dumping him up and down in a bucket full of water. And she said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Baptizing the cat." And he says, "You're scaring him to death. Don't you see he doesn't want that?" And Johnny says he should have thought of that before he joined my church. Now, no hats. This is just from me to you. It's good to be a part of a congregation that has expectations. It is important to be a part of a community of faith that expects something from us. There are too many in too many different churches that are just spectators to the Christianity that's unfolding around them. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that you can only be involved in a dozen different things that church buildings offer in order to count. Ministry has a lot of different shapes and forms, individually and collectively. I'm talking about a deep commitment to live a different kind of life, because that's what Jesus wants. I want to ask you, what kind of church do you really want to be a part of? I'm asking us to follow Jesus by being in him, by being with him, by becoming like him, and by doing what he did. That's what disciples do. That's Beth Rabban. And that is the kind of following I believe Jesus invites us to be a part of. You see, following Jesus is not just about getting our life into him. It's also about getting his life into us. And so Jesus said, "Small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." And when Jesus said that, he wasn't suggesting that the way is narrow because just a few people are invited to find it. Jesus invited everybody. And no matter where you are in your spiritual journey today, I want you to know you are welcome here. Jesus invites everybody But you see, he doesn't want us to simply be content with a shallow kind of discipleship. He wants us to go deeper. There comes a point in all of our lives where we can't get to where Jesus is if we're content to just stay where we are. And I don't really know how to communicate that. I know a lot of people here have experienced that kind of meaningful relationship with the Lord, but it's hard to describe. You know, it's kind of like when you're hitting a golf ball, you're hitting a baseball, there's a sweet spot. And some of you may not ever know this who've played golf. There is a sweet spot on your golf club. And when you hit the ball in that spot, it's like a tuning fork goes off in your body. Same thing is true about hitting a baseball. And I don't know how to describe that. I've experienced it. And sometimes when you get to these things that seem more experiential than factual, some people start getting nervous. And I don't want to make anybody nervous. But here we are, this wonderful family of faith. And I want us to consider how we can help each other to go deeper in following Jesus. Because that is what we are meant to do. And Jesus invites everybody, but the reality is not everybody wanted to do life his way. And so a lot of people went their own way. So many churches only ask, do you accept Jesus? Good, check. And you know what that does? You can say you believe in Jesus and still live any way you want. And that's really not what discipleship is. So I have a question to ask this morning. It's a simple one. I want you to ask yourself, is there a way that I am doing life that gets in the way of living for Jesus? Is the way that I'm doing life in the way of following Jesus? You see, that's what the fisherman and the tax collector and the zealot and the Pharisee and the rich young ruler and the woman at the well and Mary Magdalene and Mary and Martha and hundreds and hundreds of other people had to decide. Do I really want to follow him? And for some, the cost was just too high. And Jesus did not dumb it down for everybody. He said, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Taking up your cross. I know that some people think their mother-in-law is their cross to bear, or maybe their boss, or maybe whatever. A cross had to do with dying. Dying to self. So that you could give yourself to a cause that is greater than yourself. There's nothing cheap about that. And there's nothing easy about that. I think I've mentioned a time or 20 or 50 that when I was going through high school and college sports, it doesn't make any difference how bad the coach is. The one thing he knows how to do is make the team run. And I hated running. I hated every step of running. After practice, we have to run for a mile. I probably averaged about 25 miles a week throughout all of my high school and college athletics. hated every step. And that's why I'm so amazed at a woman named Joy Johnson, who took up running marathons at the age of 60. She ran hundreds of miles every week. She competed in marathons that were 26 miles long. The last New York City marathon she competed in was in the year 2011, at the age of 86. New York City, that yearly marathon, it's a tough race. Al Roker always looked for Joy because he wanted to interview her after she finished. And you'll see here in this picture, this is the last photograph of Al Roker interviewing Joy Johnson after she just completed the New York City Marathon. And you notice she has a bandage on her head. She fell down about mile 20. And in Joy Johnson fashion, she got up and she finished the race, blood dripping down her head. And finally, at the end of the race, she was bandaged. And there she is for the interview. And she went back to her hotel room, laid down on the bed, and died. Died with her running shoes on. And I guess maybe I just think about this a little bit more as I get older, but I want to die pursuing the greatest passion I have in life. Chasing after my rabbi. Learning from my rabbi. Doing things like my rabbi does them. That's my passion. I'm wondering about yours. You see, I want to be under his yoke. The yoke of his teaching, the yoke of his lifestyle. And Jesus says, come follow me. And some will tell you it is the best way, and some will say, no way. The question is, what do you say? I ask for your prayers. I ask for your consideration about how we can grow in this great cause at this place. Everybody's invited. But we are called to follow Jesus. Not in the sense of just agreeing about some ideas. We are called to live his life in this time and in this place.